Hey everybody, welcome to Creators Anonymous. I'm James, and this is my co-host Seth.
Hey everybody.
And on today's show, we have Alex from King's Tabletop Lounge in Redding, California. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. A little bit of a rough day today. We had a loss yesterday. We had a friend close to us that passed, but other than that, we're doing really, really good.
I'm sorry to hear about that. Was it related to coronavirus?
No, we just had a friend who comes by the store a lot who got into an ATV accident and it just didn't go well.
Oh, that.
I almost had to cancel today, but I was like, I'm excited about this. It's going to be really good.
I would have been bummed out if you canceled, but I would have been completely understanding about it because that's a horrible thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, where you're from and your journey into leading up into opening tabletop?
Yeah, I can tell you guys that story, and you guys can tell me to shut up when I'm rambling on or going on too big. But my name is Alex Daly, and I am here in Redding, California, and I'm the owner of the King's Tabletop Lounge and also an online store called Dice and Dragons. So I run a newer concept that I call a tabletop lounge, and I call it that because there really isn't a way to describe what it is that we're doing here, other than it is the hybrid of your local game store meshed with a living room. And so we are over 2,000 square feet of giant couches, 4x8 tables, over 200 video games, Wi-Fi that's 300 megabits per second, snacks, drinks, and basically every video game console imaginable. And it's just a gigantic open space for people to come in and read and hang out from 3 to midnight every day and just kind of live.
I saw some of those videos on YouTube. That looks amazing. I love your store.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's surrounded around the concept of building community, and that's what I'm really passionate about. Is, there's this magical feeling that people get at about 2 or 3 a.m. when they have not had enough sleep and they're hanging out with a group of friends at a Denny's or around coffee or just chilling out in somebody's house where the conversation's really good, and I tried capturing that and creating a storefront around it, because a lot of the places that I go that I would hang out that were businesses, as soon as we started to get into a game or get into anything that was really invested, there was always a pressure to move on, buy something, or get out, or we had been there too many hours, we needed to open the table for somebody else. And I really wanted to create just kind of a stewing pot for people to be every day for as long as they wanted to. And it's been really, really awesome. We've had people meet here and get married through people that they've met here. People
Cool.
build friendships, people find jobs, people just really connect that way.
There's one thing that's popping up in game stores around here a lot, and I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you ever heard of a Hero Forge station?
I have not.
So there's a website
cool.
called heroforge.com, and on there you can build your own miniatures, and you can either pay to have them print them out and ship them to you, or you can buy the 3D printing mapping of the character that you completely designed, from everything from race to weapons, everything, mounts, everything on it. It's a really cool website. And then you could buy the 3D print and 3D print it right out. Have you ever looked into, because I know you're a huge fan of Pathfinder. And
I'm familiar with Hero Forge. Is Hero Forge Station where they just have like an in-house printer for being able to do that?
Yeah. They have like 2 or 3 printers. Basically, your customers just pay like a $10 fee to print out just for the materials that they use.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I can see the benefit of that, because sometimes when you order the minis, it takes a little while because they're in such high demand. So being able to just print them out right in the moment. I haven't considered doing anything like that in this shop yet, mostly because our local library here in Redding, California, is pretty amazing, and they actually have a 3D printer lab there. It's available for use for free with unlimited plastics. So you can pop over there to make. Now, the 3D printer that there is, I don't think it is, the highest grade quality you could ever imagine, but still, it's more than enough to get things done.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Our library does everything like that.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to look into going over there and seeing what it would take to use it myself, and maybe start printing minis just to have here at the shop.
So what made you want to start the game store? You kind of talked about community. You talked about a couple of other things. Was there a main a big idea that helped kind of get that going, or?
Yeah, there's a business answer that I give to people. There's a spiritual answer I give to people. As you can tell, I have 2 TikTok accounts. Crazy Jesus Beard is me separating a lot of my spiritual conversation from the Dice and Dragons TikTok, where I just focus on explaining the business. And it's not because I believe that business shouldn't be integrated with spirituality. Obviously, my store is souped with it. But it's because I know that when people are online, just like going to YouTube, they're looking for videos on a specific subject. And so there may be some people who are wanting just the bare bones of how to start a small business, and they may not want to be jumping into a theological discussion. Or you might have other people who are looking for a theological discussion. They couldn't care less about starting their own store. So I pulled the 2 apart. But the business answer, game stores, anytime you open a business, your first thing that you have to be is tired.
Tired?
You just have to be tired. You have to be tired of your job. You have to be tired of the place that you work. You have to be tired of the same thing over and over and over again. For me, I was tired of the way that game stores were. I grew up in Colorado, so I've been to Mile High Comics, which at one point in time in the 90s was the mecca of comic book stores anywhere. Famous story of Mile High Comics. It was some guy stumbled into an auction and bid on a warehouse, I believe is the storyline, that the mafia had just as a way to launder money. And in that warehouse, they had purchased a bunch of comic books for magazine stands that they had that they used to launder money. If I'm getting it right, you'd have to Wikipedia it. So he ends up getting all these newsstand article magazine boxes and then opening them, and there's just oceans of first edition comic books because the mafia had these newsstands, and whenever they ordered comics, they just shoved them in a box and threw them in a warehouse. So you can imagine running across a couple copies of Batman #1 because nobody knew it was when it came out. Spider-Man, Superman, other stuff like that. So person up striking it really big and opening up a comic book store about the size of a grocery store, a large grocery store. And so looking into Mile High Comics is a really cool story. Now they've pretty much all but disappeared. There's other famous game stores like Xanadu in Seattle, and there's other places that are in like Manhattan. And every time I walked into these stores, they were all the same thing over and over and over again, which is floor to ceiling, front to back, side to side, wall to wall inventory. And that was it. It was all single issue comic books or statues of superheroes and villains that people wanted to look at, but nobody wanted to buy because they were like 50 to 100 to a couple $100. A lot of collector's items, a lot of trading cards, but there was nowhere really to hang out and to play. And that sucks. Because, you'd have folding chairs and folding tables, but that's pretty much the cheapest way to surface to play on. And anybody that's played a game on a folding table, if a stiff breeze comes by, it just knocks your game over. It's terrible. So I kept going to these places because they were so poorly decorated, and I realized, man, there is a huge demand for gamers because they go and they buy everything from these game stores, and they're super thankful that the shop even exists, so they don't complain about how bad it is or how bad it stinks or how bad it looks. They're just happy to be able to buy their addiction. And then they go and cramp into living rooms and basements and wherever they can fit. I'd go into places like Starbucks that people loved being, and the atmosphere was incredible. I mean, Starbucks is just any of the coffee shops that you go to, even in Seattle, their whole thing is atmosphere because they know coffee isn't enough. So what coffee shops really... I'm sorry?
It's all about the come, sit down, use our free Wi-Fi, enjoy coffee, because Starbucks discovered that if you give somebody a place to be and you give them something like free Wi-Fi, not only will they stay longer, but they'll purchase more coffee.
Yeah, the business concept for this, which you guys probably know, is called the third space. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that the first third space that existed was the bar, was the pub. And that goes all the way back through history.
I remember one of your videos, you said if you wanted to start a game store, start collecting, put stuff in closets, hold on to a bunch of stuff, and then when you actually have the space, bring all that stuff out and use it for decoration, sell it. Don't hold on to anything. Have if somebody wants it, by all means, you can get it again. Sell it.
Yeah, one of the mottos I have for creators, especially people that are getting started, is it's my own personal motto. I should get it tattooed on myself, which is suck until you don't. That's just the way that it is with creating artwork, because I draw a lot. And growing up, I was always showing people my drawings and be like, well, it's not that good, but I'm still blah, blah, blah. And I kept demeaning myself and demeaning my work and demeaning my drawing, because what I was really saying was, oh, my drawings are not a perfect photograph rendering. I apologize. And then I realized as an illustrator, you're never trying to get photograph realization unless you're a photographer. And there are some mediums of illustration where, yeah, you could try and make it look as photoreal as possible. And there are some people that are great at doing that. But then there are other people that just draw garbage and make a ton of money off of it that aren't trying to make it look good at all, you know? So that can be fun to just do whatever it is that you're setting out to do and suck at it until you don't, because other people are going to tell you whether your stuff still sucks way before you realize that it doesn't. You know, you're going to be like, oh no, this sucks. And they'll be like, no, this is amazing. And yeah, it's a bit of a struggle to start off with, but the Starbucks concept, what we're talking about here, that you guys notice, the Wi-Fi, the place to sit, it's called a third space. And a third space goes all the way back to pubs, like way back in Europe. And that is, home is your first space, work is your second space, and then the third space is wherever it is that is not work or home. And the pub was huge for that, because dad would go to work or mom would go to work, and then they'd be at home, and you just needed a place to chill that wasn't either. And game stores are desperate for that. And until we came along, people were really still kicking around trying to figure out how to make that work. Because when I see coffee shops, I see what they're doing is amazing. And I said, hey, I want to replicate that in a game store. But a lot of people took that literally and said, let's create a board game cafe. And so you find them everywhere, especially in Seattle, where you walk in and it's a coffee shop with an entire wall of board games, and that's amazing. But the hard thing about that is you can't really get in an 8-hour session of Dungeons and Dragons at a cafe. There are a lot of larger board games, even Monopoly, that take so long to play that pretty much those cafes exclusively stick to games that are 30 minutes or less.
Because they want that revolving door.
Yeah, they have to, and it makes perfect sense. It really does. So the motivation for me was, I like to experiment with business. I really, really do. I like to play around with business. I like to play around with, it's just the artistic side of me that likes to really just mess around and manipulate stuff and play with it. Even the concept of church. It's really fun to kind of look at things and go, why are we doing it that way? Why are we doing it this way? Could it look differently? And so if comic book stores were, if you could relate them to a sandwich, right? 2 pieces of bread and then whatever you want in the middle. And that makes a sandwich. And if you go to every game store in America, you could see 2 pieces of bread, and this one's ham and cheese, but that one is peanut butter and jelly, and that one is whatever. Well, I began to look at it as, yeah, but what if a game store was soup? What if a game store was lasagna? What if a game store was cereal? What if a game store was, you know, just a mixture of different things? As in, what if you ripped out the guts of what made it work and play around with it? And the main thing that all gamers are looking for is a place to connect and a place to show off. That's really why you get into community, is you want to show off your skills, whether it's your video game skills or your painting skills or just the deck that you've built. And you also want community. You want people to tell you that you're awesome, connect with you, and to not be an outcast. And so I decided to go in the business of offering people community rather than inventory, because there are these incredible businesses that I love, like Amazon and, Target and other places like that, Barnes and Noble, that are becoming really aggressive about offering board games. And game stores are sitting there and complaining about how they're having to shut down. But the reality is you don't complain, you just need to evolve. And that's why anybody hates anything. It's because they figured out how it worked. It worked for them for a while. And then as soon as things started to change, they just scream at it until they die or they change.
That's really kind of how our nation is right now. Everybody seems to be screaming and wanting change, but nobody's really proposing a change, and nobody's really adapting and overcoming.
Yeah, and it's like, 50 years ago it was don't sit too close to the TV, you'll go blind. And now video games are VR, and you're literally strapping the TV to your face.
It's a good analogy.
But that's because it takes a long time to learn how to be good at something. It takes a long time to learn how to be politically aware. And it takes a long time to be good at business. It takes a long time to know technology. And then it changes overnight. And you can imagine how you would feel if you spent 10 years learning Spanish and finally you're really fluent in it. And then overnight the language is now Mandarin. and that's what's happening in this country. Suck. That's what's happening in this country is now there are still parents who are teaching their kids Spanish, which is amazing, but everything is turning over, and China is becoming the open door for a lot of things. And so parents that heavily invested in teaching their kids Spanish are going, well, that's useful. It really is. Mexican culture, Latino culture, Spanish culture is incredible and will always be rooted into this country. But now Mandarin is opening doors for tech and trade and all of this other stuff. And so it's kind of frustrating that you have to start all over again.
Yeah, it's so hard because honestly, I love the whole Latin culture. Like I honestly think the taco is the greatest invention that was ever created.
It's wonderful.
I can't. I've never had a bad taco in my life. Never. I've had bad. I've had a bad version of, but I've never had a bad taco. And but the world is making a shift right now, and I'm struggling just to keep up with it. So I can completely understand.
I had to, the way that I had to do that recently is things are going in our shop and it was working-ish, but not working. Here in Northern California, we had the car fire and our city almost burned down. And that was here in Redding. That wasn't next door. That was right here. And then we had a freeze not too long after that knocked out most of the trees, because the trees in California don't have a strong root system because they just aren't used to bad weather. And so we had this crazy snowstorm hit, and when this icy snow landed on the trees, it was so heavy that a lot of the trees, hundreds of trees in the area, just tipped over and collapsed because the roots couldn't hold up under it.
Wow.
And nobody really heard about that one because that's just a local issue, but we had hundreds of trees that were just gone, broken.
How many inches of snow did you get? Did you get like 3 or 4 feet, or like, I'm wondering what it would take to take down a tree?
I forget exactly how many inches it was, but it was a wet snow, and so it really was. It was bad. It was a blizzard, but it was a wet snow, and so that extra weightiness, limbs just broke off because these are really dry trees out here. And then after that, we have had COVID hit, and then we've had riots that have hit. We're very close to Portland, so we've had buses of Antifa members show up here. So there's always been things that right when we picked up momentum as a physical store, something came in and just kicked the chair out from us. And that's really, really tough. And so for me, I saw other businesses closing, and I decided I have to learn something new. So I'd been struggling not to get online for a long time, and then finally decided, hey, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to open an online store. And I'm glad that I did, because now we have between the two accounts, we have 250,000 followers, millions of views on videos, and our online store is doing really well. And in the sense of, when you're used to being behind in rent by about $20,000, and you're like, man, we've got a great property manager who's being really generous in light of all the emergencies going on. It's tough. And so we opened up the store, and now we're still working our way out of some debt. But it's affording us to be able to actually run the space open for free and let people just walk in, because people are buying dice and mugs and T-shirts, and we're always growing that. But there were other stores that did not go online, and they closed. They're gone. They're dead. They're extinct. And it sucks, because I really like those owners.
Do you think TikTok had a huge impact on your business?
Massive, massive, massive impact. Huge.
Because honestly, I wouldn't even know who you are if it wasn't for TikTok. And all I do is I'm one of those guys that just creeps on TikTok, and I find those creative people and I reach out to them, and I'm like, look, I want to interview you. I want you on my show. I want to give you a space to talk about your passion. And I love the fact that you use TikTok to show people your store. Like, my mind was blown when you uncovered that taxidermy red dragon head for your wall. And I was like, that is so awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really fun. And I was online. I've been online since LiveJournal. I've been on since MySpace, and then after that, Facebook. And, even saying LiveJournal, there are going to be people listening to the podcast. They're like, oh my gosh, I forgot that existed. And, YouTube.
No.
And, I've been trying to grow online ever since those. So it's like some people say it takes 10, 20 years to become an overnight success. But TikTok was definitely the platform that blew up for us.
That's good. And man, that sucks. That sucks. They're threatening to shut it down right now too.
Yeah, and I don't think that'll happen. Things like this have happened over and over and over and over again. They said that they were going to shut Facebook down so many times.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, I can understand the beef with it and everything. So, moving on to your store, what is your absolute favorite item you have in your store right now?
I really enjoy, the red dragon head that we got, which is really, really fun. But I'm slowly starting to collect some more. I'm a huge fan of the Fantastic Four, and so that's my team. I'm very much excited for them to get a proper movie from Marvel Studio within the next couple of years. And so I've been collecting pop figures for them, action figures for them, and it's been really exciting because they're out of nowhere. Fantastic Four merchandise is popping up everywhere, which is, I think Marvel knows that there's a movie coming out, and so they're trying to remind everybody of this team and put stuff out beforehand.
So I actually have a little insight for you. I don't know how often you listen to podcasts, but Marvel is actually gearing up a little faster than I think you are. Marvel Studios launched a few weeks ago the podcast Marvels, and it's all about the fallout of Galactus's attack on New York City with the Fantastic Four.
Gotcha.
And they have an amazing voice cast. For crying out loud, one of the reporters is played by what's his name? I just had his name and I forgot it. He played in that stoner movie where they smoked weed and they could see the freaking ghost of a friend that let him get into Harvard. I can't think of him.
The James Franco.
No.
Seth Rogen.
Redman played in it. All over the internet.
It'll drive you nuts.
It's gonna drive me nuts.
Yeah. The next thing I would say, though, is I think one of the things you guys want to know is the spiritual side of why I opened the store. Which
Method Man. It was Method Man.
Oh, there you go.
Method Man plays one of the reporters in Marvels, and it's just an amazing storyline altogether.
It's gonna be really cool.
Yeah, no, it's out. Like, the whole first season's out. If you're a fan of the Fantastic Four, I strongly recommend listening to this.
That sounds cool.
It's an amazing podcast.
That's really cool. So what other things do you guys want to know about?
Like you said, the spiritual reason for starting the store. I mean, you talked about the business side, and you covered that really well. I'm curious about the spiritual side, and I think you said there was one more reason too.
Well, the spiritual side for opening the store, I have, my grandpa was a Pentecostal minister. My grandpa was on my dad's side was also a minister as well, but he was a little bit more rough around the edges. And would, he owned his own trucking company and played poker in the woods and just was, one of those like hillbilly pastors. And I say that with affection. So my family's very, very spiritual. But I grew up, God just was going a real different direction with my life from the beginning, because when I grew up, there's always this thing that was trying to pull me in two different directions, which was, there's a lot of things that I really like: art, Dungeons and Dragons, superheroes, all of these things. And there are a lot of what you would call gatekeepers, which is people who are saying, oh, you can't like that thing for this reason or for that reason or this other reason. And Christians are really good at that. They're deciding, who's in, who's out, and, and it sucks. It can really, really, really suck. So I started this store. The spiritual reason behind it was I just really, when I was younger, I wanted to be, I really got sold out on just pursuing a life of ministry. But when I was about 12 years old, I really began to question, going to church, being in an environment. Youth group was very hypocritical. I was in a Southern Baptist, church. And so people would, just do whatever they wanted to all week and then come to youth group, raise their hands, worship. And I really had this disconnected relationship with God because he was a douchebag. He was just this rich dad, before I had a relationship with God, all I would see is you'd have the really popular pastor's kids and worship team kids that would do whatever they wanted to all week. And whenever they saw me, they would call me names. They would pick on me because I was the way that I was. And just very different, and all of this, and then they would walk in after doing whatever they wanted to all week, and they would walk in on Wednesday, and they'd go to youth group, and they'd raise their hands, and they'd say, yes, Jesus, and then they would go up to the altar, and they would give their hearts to Jesus, and big, deep pockets daddy douchebag would write them a forgiveness check that would wipe their slate clean, pat them on the head, and say, boys will be boys, and then he would send them on their way to go do whatever it is that they wanted to, and they would raise hell the rest of the week and be basically human garbage. And then they would come back in for youth group and they'd be like, oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. Oh, well, there was this thing and that thing, and I'm just so sorry, and I didn't mean to. And Big Daddy God would be like, ha, 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 that's okay, kiddo. Here's another big fat check so that you don't have to deal with your consequences, And I had a very rough perspective of missions because I would watch kids go, all of this changed, by the way. I have a different perspective now, but you'd see kids in youth group and they'd be like, I'm going to go on a missions trip. And the church would go, yay. And they'd be like, I'm going to raise a ton of money. And they'd go, yay, you're amazing. You're incredible. You're famous. You're awesome. We love you. You're incredible. We're going to put you on stage. And then they would go on a missions trip to these countries that were so broke, it hurt. And the countries were so excited that the white missionaries would show up. They would literally use the best of their resources, which they couldn't afford, to put on a show for the missionaries out of a place of actual honor and actual appreciation. And so these, white ministry kids and, whoever else, just whoever the pastor's kids were, would go on these missions trips, and they would help build a little stick hut, and they would hand out stickers and candy and toys, and they would eat chicken and watermelon and whatever the village could put together, because in Africa, getting a hold of items like chicken and getting a hold of items like watermelon is actually really, really expensive and hard to get a hold of. So it's not even a stereotype. It really is a prized commodity there. And they would eat like kings, and then they would come back off of their vacation and they would go, oh, it was such an amazing time. Look at all these photos I took. And people would be like, oh, you're wonderful. And all they did was just dive and dig these places deeper into poverty. It was just a vacation that made you look more spiritual. So by the time I was 15, I was done. The only reason I was still going to youth group was because I lived in a house that was cramped. We lived in a condo with, 3 other siblings, and I just wanted to get out. It was nice to be able to go get pizza and get out of my house once a week. But when I was about 15 years old, I was looking at a lot of other religions and a lot of other spirituality, and somebody basically called me out and said, have you ever actually read the Bible, or are you just showing up every single week and getting breastfed from the minister? Are you just showing up every single week and having everything spoon-fed to you, or have you actually tackled this stuff yourself? And being somebody who listened to the Ramones and the Dead Kennedys and prized myself as being a very intellectual, rebellious punk, I was like, okay, that's fair. And I started looking at scripture myself, and I started seeing this picture of Jesus where he was in the same boat I was. He was pissed off for the same reasons, and I was just like, where is any of this? But when you get older, you realize that there are only things that they talk about in church, because anybody who does anything, you have to really talk about whatever pays the bills. And it's not even evil. It's actually not creators' fault. It's people's desires that are the problem. So people yell at the media and the news for covering stories, but whenever the news tries to cover anything else, nobody's watching. And so I got really into a place where I started changing my perspective on God. And then finally I was like, okay, I really want to do ministry. I really want to go into missions. And God said, okay. And so at that time, I really prided myself on being impressive and being like, hey, God, you can send me anywhere. I know that there are all these missionaries who are saying, God, you can send me anywhere. And then you tell them where you're going to send them, like Burma or, Iceland or wherever. And they go, no, not there. But I was like, I am ready to go anywhere. And I felt like God said, okay, you're going to go to the United States of America. Well, that's where I was. And so I'm like, that's not a thing. That doesn't count, And over time, I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually supposed to stay here. There's so much corruption and so much spiritual, just everything. I need to be able to stay here and make a difference. And so I finally reconciled myself to, okay, God, you threw a curveball at me once, but you can't do it again. I'm willing to go to whatever group you want. Battered women, troubled teens, drug addicts, whatever you want me to. I'll be with the homeless. There's no group that I will shy away from. And God was like, okay, Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, no. I was like, that is not a thing. I'm like, that's not a thing. And, but then God began to speak to me, and he was just like, hey, everybody is telling everybody who is connected to fantasy that you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. So you have all of these people who are really hungry for the supernatural and really hungry to see people raised from the dead and walk on water and call, just do all of these amazing things that Jesus did and heal people. And they shut it off and they close it out. And anything supernatural, anything spiritual is of the devil. Immediately. It's a hoax. It's a lie. And if you dabble in it, or if you're even attracted to it, you're demonic. It's witchcraft. It's all these other things. And I was like, well, that sucked. That really does suck. And so I felt like God was speaking to me at an early age and saying, people need to get back into fantasy. C.S. Lewis was an on-fire revivalist, and he wrote Narnia. He wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which means he understood witchcraft. He understood paganism. He understood and wove these things in. And so right now, in church, people look at Christianity, and it sucks. For the most part, people don't see anything other than just a spiritual belief, like God is like Santa Claus. He's like the universal president, and if we vote for him all of our life, then he'll allow us to be citizens of heaven. And they look at all these parts where people are being healed and raised from the dead, and all of these amazing things are happening, and they just go, oh, that doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't happen anymore. And it's sad because it happens all the time. It's something you could get away with believing a long time ago or before YouTube, but now there's so much evidence of the miraculous happening with people. And part of the reason why it doesn't happen anymore is because everybody that goes to church was basically taught, if you want to venture towards the supernatural at all, you are participating in witchcraft and you'll go to hell. So I wanted to open up a game store because I wanted to create a place where people could come in and interact with Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering and know that they can be a fantasy writer, that they can go after these things, and that God can use them. Because and this is the last bit of it, is, you can basically warp people's perspective on anything. I've talked to a lot of people who come into a shop like this and they go, so how do you have Harry Potter and Dungeons and Dragons, and doesn't the Bible say to avoid witchcraft? And I tell them, yes, but fantasy is very different than witchcraft. It's not even on the same country of what the two are, because one is a belief in the fantastical and the other one is actually partnering with demonic spirits to manipulate the world and do horrible, awful things. And they would say, well, I'm just not sure if I can let my kids hang out in here. And I say, well, the main thing you have to remember is you really have to have a God perspective. If you don't have a God perspective, you can have a crappy perspective and find the devil in anything. If kids are playing sports, if they're playing football, for instance, I could tell somebody, well, I can go to my grandma and say, I want to play football. And she could say, no, you can't play football. You'll go to hell. And you'd be like, why? Be like, well, if you play football, you're going to drink. You're going to do drugs. You're going to party with your friends. You're going to sleep around. Then you're going to get a scholarship. You're going to be competitive. You're going to get into fights. You're going to get distracted from going to church because you'll have practice. And then you're going to get married. And then you're going to get divorced. And then you're going to evade your taxes. And it's just all demonic. And you'd be like, oh. And
that is a loophole.
And your grandma could say, and you know that God isn't for it, because everybody that plays sports, everybody sustains a physical injury at some point in time, and that's God saying, this is not from me. And you'd be like, wow, that is the stupidest argument I've ever heard. But that's if you love sports, because you'd immediately jump on the bandwagon of, no, that's not what sports are about. It's about competition. It's about discipline. It's about finding a team and community and connecting and going further together. It's about not being an individual. It's about, having the discipline. It's about kids who normally are too broke to go to college getting scholarships. It's about people that can't even imagine having a wealthy lifestyle, making good money. It's about having a place to go. It's about all of this other stuff. It's about building yourself up. It's about health. It's about all these things. And I could say, well, you're a child abuser, because if you let your kids play sports and you know that they're going to sustain an injury that could impact their ability to work and they'll be in pain for the rest of their life with medical expenses, you might as well let them go play in the street. See, if you look at things through hell, you will find hell. You will find the devil, whatever it is. But if you look at things through God, you will find the gold in whatever it is you're going through, because there are some people that are now missionaries are less geographic, which they still are, and are now taking a turn towards demographic. As in, you have people who are wanting to become bartenders, and they're wanting to work in adult bookstores as a ministry. And you go, 100, 200, 300 years ago, somebody'd say, I'm going to go to China. And they'd be like, you can't go to that godless country. That's not God's will. And you see now that, obviously the church is built on going to all of these countries, But now you have people that are saying, hey, I really feel like I'm supposed to go work in a strip club, or I'm supposed to go work as a bartender. And you go, I'm not so sure about that. But you have to ask yourself, if somebody just had a miscarriage, their wife had a miscarriage, and they're going to get drunk, and they have resigned themselves to go get pissed drunk, do you want an atheist or a revivalist pouring the shots?
I definitely want a revivalist.
And so a lot of people,
that revivalist is looking out for him. He's not going to just pour him shot after shot after shot and then cut him off. He's gonna take the time. He's gonna pour that shot, and he's gonna talk to him. He's like, man, tell me what's going on. And
do you want somebody who's working in an adult bookstore who's focused on the importance of marriage and a healthy sexual relationship, or somebody who is literally making oceans of money on the backside in porn and other things like that? And human trafficking. I think the idea of going into all the world and preaching the gospel is becoming more demographic, and people are starting to go into areas that normally they weren't able to beforehand. And because of that, you have to change the way that Christianity looks. And that's what's hard, is because if you go to a missionary in China and you see what they look like as a Christian in China, you're not going to see the way or the beliefs or the way that they follow as you would have here in Texas. They're going to look very different because they're in China, they adapt to the culture, they do things differently, and you go, that's awesome. But demographics, it's not so easy. It's not a location. You can't disconnect and go to a different world. The person is still here. They haven't gone anywhere. And so when they begin to change and you begin to see them adapt to the culture that they're a part of, it becomes very judgy. It becomes very judgmental, because there are things in Scripture that will never change, and things that are sin and the way that God demands things. But then there are other things that are very, very changeable over time. And so as you own a game store, or as you become somebody who works in an adult bookstore or bartender, you're going to do things that other people who work in a church aren't going to do.
That's a good point. So next question, how did you come up with the name King's Table? Is it just because of the faith aspect, or is there a deeper reason, and were there other names that you came up with?
So for me, one of the things that I love is I believe that people can be prophetic. God speaks to them, and it's not a big deal. It really isn't. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, it takes a real orphan spirit to think that it's unusual for your dad to speak to you. And so for me, a lot of my ideas and my creativity comes from just sitting every day and spending some time with God and actually having a conversation with him and hearing from him. And I felt like King's Table is actually a name I didn't really care for. I kind of laid it out and I was like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? Because I had a business beforehand that did not work out called Mana Game Store, and the logo for that was a blue mana potion. I loved the way it all fit together from a spiritual perspective, and I was supposed to drop that one and not do it anymore. It was King's Table, and I was like, the King's Tabletop Lounge. That's going to be a nightmare for business, for anything, because nobody, like, you want a business like Nike, you want a business like McDonald's, Target, something really easy. And to have the King's Tabletop Lounge is just a mouthful. But I felt like it was something that God was talking to me about. And it has to do with, I believe, Mephibosheth, who is somebody who is crippled and disabled, who David ended up seeking out and realizing that this person had been mistreated and left out. And David's father had made a connection with his family, basically said, hey, you're not going to be homeless anymore. You're going to come eat at my table. And so it was literally like the president of the United States going and finding a homeless person and saying, hey, didn't our dads know each other? Like, yeah. And now you're living under a bridge. Yeah. Well, you can come live at the White House, and you can, it would be a huge deal. And so I believe that that's where the name comes from and connects with that idea.
Nice. That's cool. What are some of the challenges you've helped people in your store overcome, or that you've seen on a community level? Maybe it's learning a new game. Maybe it's a challenge they're facing. What do you have?
We are really focused. Me and my wife are passionate about this because of community. And so we help people become socially well-adjusted. We don't manipulate people into becoming what we think people should be. It's that we've been in youth group for a long time, and me and my wife really gravitate towards people that are socially awkward. Maybe they have autism. Maybe they grew up in an environment where they were sheltered, or in a religious environment where they couldn't get out. The one thing that you find in the nerd community so much in geek culture is a terrible, terrible rampant plague of not being able to have friends or know how to be good at healthy relationships. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, you have so many people in geek culture that are like, I don't know how to have friends. I don't know how to make friends. I don't know. And me and my wife have really focused on becoming experts at that. And so we create an environment here that really perpetuates people becoming healthier. I've had, because people show up here from 3 to midnight, hang out every day, they get close to us, and that line between a professional customer relationship and a friendship gets really blurry, really, really, really blurry. And it's hard to keep that line up. I've learned how, and I'm learning new ways every day. But when somebody comes in so often, I can actually look at them and go, we have a very large, heavy-set autistic man who I love with all my heart that hangs out here all the time. And anybody who struggles with autism knows that social conventions are just really awkward. You can literally be standing, over somebody's shoulder, breathing in their ear, looking at their magic cards, and not realize that that's creepy because your brain is something else. I had one kid that was in a youth group who was going around and they were ready to call the cops. Well, what's he doing? He's sexually harassing the women in the group. And I was like, oh, that's a real thing. And that happens. And I was like, what's he doing? And he's like, he's taking pictures of the girls' butts. And I'm like, okay, so whenever I am around somebody who's autistic, I immediately give them the benefit of the doubt first. And I go and talk to him and I'm just like, hey. He's like, hey. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, nothing. And I was like, okay, you're taking pictures. What are you taking pictures of? He's like, oh. And he went to explain that in Texas, one thing you need to know is that a lot of the jeans there have rhinestones on them. And so the butt pockets have rhinestones on them and embroidery and designs. And so as an intelligent person, he's fascinated with art and he sees that all of these butt pockets have these really intricate designs. And so he's taking pictures of them. Like you would take pictures of a photograph on the wall or a cool couch or a mini in a game store. And I was like, oh, and I just really direct with him. I was like, hey, so you're taking pictures of girls' butts, and that's inappropriate because it has sexual connotations to it. And immediately, and this is what I love about people that struggle with autism, he just got it. He was like, oh, okay. And I was like, yeah, it's inappropriate. You don't want to do that. Okay. I was like, you should go apologize to them. He was like, yeah. And he just did. He wasn't like, he was just like, okay. You know, like he immediately got it. So one of our friends here that's the heavyset guy, he comes in and I was like, hey, when you come in, people want to hang out with you, but you definitely need to work on your hygiene, which I know you want to do. One of the things you can do is have a change of shirt whenever you come in, because you're a big guy like me, you sweat a lot. And if you throw on some deodorant, and whenever you come to the store, anytime you come to the store, I want you to have an extra shirt in your car, and I want you to change shirts when you get here. And if I did that with any other customer, oh, no. Terrible idea. But people that are autistic usually want directness. They want to know how to be more socially adjusted. They don't get offended as easily as anybody else. It was just simple math to him. So the other day I end up seeing him pull up. He gets out of his SUV and he grabs his shirt and he waves at me and he holds up his shirt and I'm like, oh, awesome. And then he goes to peel his shirt off of his back and go be completely topless in the middle of the parking lot and wiggle into a new shirt. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pick my battles. This is fine. You know, he's like, this is a huge step forward for him. But ever since coming in and having a clean shirt that wasn't drenched in sweat and other things like that, people love hanging out with him, you know? And so there are people here that sometimes come in off the street that are needy, and we don't push anybody away. We just make it, this environment is one where you're either going to get more healthy with relationships or you're not going to want to hang out here, because we're not passive aggressive. We'll let you know, hey, you have an odor. Hey, people don't like this thing. Hey, you've been talking to people for an hour straight and not asking them questions, like I'm doing right now. And and you want to be able to actually connect with people. And we've had a lot of people that leave. They're like, nope, I like who I am. But we've had other people that stay, and those people, that a lot of them that are here that are autistic, people don't know they're autistic anymore.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Honestly, my wife would love that. She works with behavioral kids in schools and everything, which right now that's not really happening. Yeah. But also I have two children that in my house that live with me, my stepdaughter and a family friend, that are massively behind. And honestly, your story would be like a godsend to both of them.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really suffer from a social illness or social awkwardness. They struggle from people around them being insanely passive aggressive. Yeah. They have something in their teeth and it's there for years because no one will tell them that it's in their teeth. Or when they finally tell them they have something in their teeth, it's drenched in shame and criticism and like, you know, and people don't need that. People are terrible at conflict. And you can go up to somebody and really tell them the worst things about them as a person in the best way possible and have them feel super loved, you know?
Yep.
A really good perspective. Dude, thanks for sharing that. So you talked about you and your wife connecting with people. Are there any books that help you guys grow, or your store that you guys read to help you kind of have an influence? Maybe it's on the kids, maybe it's on your customers.
I actually just seen you post a video about this where you had books on a bunch of different religions, paganism, witchcraft, Buddhism, and stuff like that. And you were studying up on this stuff to be more inclusive. And that was another thing that really got with me. And I actually just commented on one of your other videos that one thing about Christians is they like to point the finger, and they like to say you can't do this stuff, or they like to point out that being gay is a sin. But my biggest thing about that is, didn't Jesus say above all else, love your God and love your fellow man? I don't know, just pointing that finger, accusing people, saying being gay is a sin or anything along those lines, it just sits so wrong with me. Like, yes, being gay is a sin, but he doesn't have to answer to you. The only person he has to answer to is God. So what gives you the right to point that finger? And just seeing you with all of those books and being so inclusive, doing that research just so those people can feel more comfortable in your store, that was amazing.
Yeah, Christians' biggest opponent in life is sin. Their biggest opponent in life is sin. Christians are always focused on not sinning. The sad thing is most Christians have no idea what sin is. You're to sit down and ask a Christian, what is sin? And they'd be like, well, it's stealing, and it's no. The concept, the precept of sin, what is it? Why is it wrong? And you usually hit a wall. We know what not to do. We don't know why not. So that's why whenever I have discussions with people, and they'll be like, first of all, I never talk about anybody else's sin without talking about mine. And so people will be like, do you think that homosexuality is a sin? I said, well, first off, I believe that having a struggle with pornography is a sin, and that's where I'm at. And the Bible says that all sin is sin. And so I know that there is sexual sin out there, whether it's pornography or whether it's bestiality or whether it's having sex before marriage or whether it's same-sex attraction. I believe everybody struggles with sexual sin. And so if you're asking me if I think homosexuality is a sin, the answer is yes. The Bible says that it is. But the thing is that we are all struggling with sexual sin. I think it's all the same. And so if you see a boy and a girl that are teenagers that are making out at youth group and they're not married, it is the exact same sin as if a boy and a boy are making out at youth group, because sexual sin is sexual sin, you know? And when I lay it out like that, there are some people who still go, I disagree with it, but usually because I come at it that angle, because it is not a question to be answered with yes or no directly. It's an answer that needs to have explanation to it. People end up going, wow, okay. And it's like, yeah, I'd be like, I'm gay. I mean, I'm not, but what's the difference? I mean, ice cream is ice cream, and you're yelling at somebody for being Rocky Road as opposed to mint chocolate chip. Everybody's lactose intolerant. So I don't care if you're eating mint chocolate chip or Rocky Road. Both of us are into, like, crapping ourselves. Our body wasn't meant to digest it.
I care. Simply because if you want chocolate with your toothpaste, then eat a chocolate bar and go brush your teeth. Don't be freezing it and call it an ice cream.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, I'm like, sin is, there are things that our body wasn't meant to digest. We can drink water if we're thirsty, and we have the ability to drink soda. Now, our body was not meant to process soda, but it can. And then there's also bleach. We can drink bleach. It will take care of our thirst, but our body wasn't meant to process bleach. And nobody even thinks about it. They go, yeah, of course you're not supposed to drink bleach. And they go, yeah, of course if you drink soda, you're going to be less healthy than if you drink water. But as soon as you start to talk about sin, people get defensive. But you go, no, there are things that God created our spirits to be able to digest. And then there are other things that are sin that we aren't supposed to digest, but we can, and it'll work. You can go through your entire life just drinking soda, but you're not going to be as healthy because your body isn't meant to process those things. And there are some things that are sin that are like bleach. They will literally just eat you alive, whether you want them to or not. People can't do meth and exist as a perfectly conscious, healthy, emotionally developed person. Meth will eat you alive, and you could say, well, I'm just being punished for doing meth. No, it's just the way that it is. So sin is just all of the things that God didn't create us for, and they're the crappy things too. God didn't create us to steal from people. So if we do, it's going to screw up our heart, and it's going to suck. There's a lot of things that God says not to do. And so when people dive into the Old Testament and they say, well, the Bible also says you're not supposed to wear mixed fabrics and all this other stuff, I say, great. I love that. The Bible also says we're supposed to work out our salvation for ourselves, with fear and trembling. So if you believe that you can live in a homosexual lifestyle and worship Jesus, go after it. Nobody is going to have that conversation except for you and God. As an adult, I celebrate your decision. If you want to smoke meth and love Jesus, go after it. You are going to have to answer that. You're going to have that talk with God. Your life is going to be yours. Nobody's going to answer for that. And I believe that there are a lot of Christians who think that they are righteous and think that they are doing the right thing and are going to get to the end of their life and realize that they stayed away from a lot of stuff they didn't need to. They ended up not involving themselves. I had a missionary one time that had a Quran because he would reach out to Muslims, and he and all of his kids had the Quran, and they studied the Quran so that they could reach out to Muslims. And one woman said, "I can't believe that you let your kids have, copies of the Quran. Aren't you worried that that's going to screw them up spiritually?" And he says, "I don't know. How many TVs do you have in your house?" There's a lot of things that we involve ourselves in that actually won't destroy us. And then there are other things that we have decided will destroy us, like reading the Quran, that could actually greatly influence our ability to be educated. Back in the Renaissance, the most intelligent people were Christians. The best artwork, the most amazing paintings were by Christians. And now it's usually the most uneducated people. And that's because for a long time, the church bought into this idea of, well, we're getting out of here any minute. Jesus is coming back. There's no reason for you to get a law degree. As soon as you get it, we're going to be taken up in the rapture. So, the whole world's going to be destroyed someday. So why would we spend time building it? And Jesus' perspective was, no, you're supposed to bring heaven to earth. If there's racism, it's because Christians have not ended racism. If people are starving to death, it's because Christians aren't feeding hungry people. And they go, well, what about people who don't believe? People who don't believe have nothing to do with anything. They don't believe. They are not under the weight of the law of Scripture or following it because they don't believe. They are where they're at. They can do whatever they want to do, and I celebrate it because they don't have the Holy Spirit inside of them. It doesn't mean it's going to work out for them at all. It just means they are not having to follow all of these things because they don't follow it. But as a believer, it is my job to give people an encounter with God. It is my job to feed hungry people. It is my job to solve the homelessness problem in my city. It is my job to take care of and do all of these things. And that's it. And so I feel like right now, what a lot of the church struggles with is just focusing on anything else other than love. And so when I have the books that I have that I'm reading, it's to get educated. It's not looking to it for answers. And it's been really helpful. We've had people come in. One of our guys, he was Wiccan and pagan and came in and played D&D for 2.5 years. And he used to be a Christian, and he left Christianity because it didn't have any power to it. And it was all condemnation, and it was all awful. And spending time with us and being here, he ended up coming in because he has a walker and a cane and a bum leg, and he's in a wheelchair on really bad days. And he tried to kill himself, and it didn't take. And he tried starving himself to death for like 3 weeks and lost like 30 pounds. And that's because his roommate, his girlfriend, his roommate who is a girl and his girlfriend that he lived with, both of them, ended up deciding that they wanted to be in a relationship. And he said, hey, I love that. Let's all be in a polyamorous relationship. And they said, no, we actually just want to date each other, and we're breaking up with you and kicking you out. And so, and that was his community for years. So he just wanted to kill himself. And then he ended up coming in one day, and I was like, dude, this stuff isn't working for you. Just give Jesus a shot. You used to have Jesus. Bring him back. See what it's like for a week. And best case scenario, if you are willing to accept Jesus and bring him back into your life and nothing changes for you, then you can spend the rest of your life being completely opposed to God, flipping him off and throwing rocks at him, because either Jesus wants to be with you and is going to change your life, or he doesn't, and he's a liar and he's a sack of crap and nothing he says is true, and it's all about following rules and it sucks. And he said, okay, I'm willing to let Jesus into my life again, but I'm going to give it a week. And I said, great. And I said, now that you've partnered with that, and you don't have to partner with that to receive healing, but I said, can we pray for your leg? And he was like, sure. And we caught it on video. He got completely healed, and it freaked him out. It freaked him out because he came in with a walker and he uses a wheelchair. And all of a sudden, he was able to fully bend over and crouch down and stand up. And ever since then, he hasn't had a problem walking with his cane or his walker. People look at that all the time and they're like, what do you mean he got healed? And it's like, it's just the same stuff that Jesus did. And then he said we could do it. And then we said, nah, pass. And that's it. And nobody even tries anymore because out of fear. And it's so funny because we just had a friend who died. ATV accident. We spent time praying and praying and praying and praying and praying. And she died. And people will go, ha, I told you none of that stuff works. And it's like, yeah, but you don't feel that way about chemotherapy. There are people who go through chemotherapy and they die of cancer. So chemotherapy must not work. We have a double standard. And so for me, I've prayed for people and seen Jesus heal them. I've seen people not get healed. And all I look at it is I'm going to keep trying. And when it does happen, it is life-changing. And when it doesn't happen, it's just a little embarrassing and you get over it. But, the church is developing a culture where people want to see God. They want to see people actually be like Jesus. And it's nice to see people be like Jesus and be cool and not a douchebag and actually feed the homeless. But it's also really cool to see people get healed and to see miracles happen, because that's why Jesus did miracles. He was clear about it. He did it to be able to show people God is real and it's not just words. The problem with Christians is they don't see any fruit from being nice to people. They go out and for the first couple of years they act like Jesus and they're nice and they're kind and they feed homeless people and they're on fire and they don't see anything change, and so they become a gatekeeper. And they become rallied around, don't listen to this pastor and don't listen to that pastor and don't do this and don't do that and all this other stuff. And they think that they're doing the world a favor, but they go from being somebody who's supposed to be a superhero and they settle for just being a security guard. I don't want to say a police officer as in police officers are amazing. What I mean is they just end up not actually changing the world. They just end up keeping people in or out and voting on who's a believer or not. So that's a long way around to say the reason why we started the shop, the reason that we did that is because if we can see people get healed and saved and amazing things happen, and if we can see people's life change through running a game store, then nobody else has an excuse to avoid anything. I mean, we are literally operating in Magic and Dungeons and Dragons. And so if anybody else looks at this and goes, wow, that's really cool, they're doing that as a ministry, then they might be inspired to do whatever it is that they want to do in their heart as ministry. So
okay, so we're gonna wind down the interview, and I want to throw some very light and nerdy questions at you.
Love it.
What's your top 3 favorite board games?
I really love Curse of was it what is it? It's Fury of Dracula. That's what it is.
Oh, good game.
Fury of Dracula is amazing. Pathfinder or D&D isn't a board game, but I'm passionate about that one. But as for board games go,
no, D&D's fine. D&D's fine.
Okay, yeah.
Anything tabletop.
Fear of Dracula, Dungeons and Dragons, and then I love playing games like Cards Against Humanity. It's a really popular one.
Nice. Sorry, that just reminded me of another video. One of the things that you do in your store is you take all the porn out, and that's a great thing. You take all the X-rated stuff. You don't buy X-rated comics or anything like that. And I have to tell you, I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, it's for home. You can do all of that stuff at home.
Yeah.
And then people can feel comfortable. I mean, I don't spit on anybody for playing full-on Cards Against Humanity, but it's safer to do it in your living room. It's more appropriate.
Okay, another quick question. What's your favorite Pokemon?
Mr. Mime.
Why Mr. Mime? I'm curious.
Oh, I love
his newest.
I love things that nobody else loves, and I love it even more if it's irritating. Mr. Mime is just super creepy. Nobody knows about Mr. Mime. He's a non-Pokemon, which is why I'm so glad when Detective Pikachu came out and they made him like a focus point character, because beforehand nobody knows who he is. I love Mr. Mime. They just came out with a pop figure of him, and I got it. I love Mr. Mime.
Since Mr. Mime is your favorite Pokemon, I got 3 follow-up questions.
Okay.
A, do you like the Galarian version of Mr. Mime and his evolution, Mr. Rhyme?
Hate Hate it.
And have you seen Pokemon Journeys on Netflix where Ash totally kicks ass using his mom's Mr. Mime?
No, and I should watch that. Yeah, the Galarian Mr. Mime annoys me. The whole ice form, all that stuff. And I don't even like that they gave Mr. Mime an evolution form. I love the fact that he was just an obscurity. Like, of all of the Pokemon, you just have this creepy guy that climbs invisible walls. And it's just like, I love this. He's not even an animal. He's just a creepy guy. And then recently they revealed that the hair on his head isn't even hair. It's just like more skin. And I was like, I love that even.
Yeah, they also revealed that the only edible parts of Mr. Mime, if you were going to be a flesh eater in the Pokemon world,
oh my gosh,
the only edible parts of Mr. Mime are the red parts.
That's amazing.
Yeah, everything else is deadly poisonous, no matter how you prepare it.
I love it. Makes sense.
Which comes to ask, why isn't he a poison type?
That's a good
Nothing
point.
about him makes sense on any level logically, and I love that.
So, quick question: Is there anyone you want to thank for getting to where you're at?
Say that again.
Is there anyone that you would want to thank for helping you get to where you're at? Someone that had an impact on your life? Maybe it's someone that helped you start the store, or.
I would say big influence on my life, really. And I had to decide this last year at school when they were like, who's a big influence on your life that is alive right now and they really need to be an influencer? You can't say Jesus. You can't, like all this other stuff. You have to come up with somebody who really shaped your life. And I was like, I've got a lot of cartoon characters that I like. But then I thought, I think my earliest influencer that changed my perspective was Pee Wee Herman.
Pee Wee Herman?
I mean,
why Pee Wee Herman?
Because everything about that show was just, what the hell is going on here?
Because
and
he's the Mr. Mime of television.
He was so, why is this happening? What am I watching? And wow, I'm still watching it. It worked and it was successl. And I love that. But I also like Wizard of Oz for the same reason. When you get into the Wizard of Oz books, Frank L. Baum was like, hey, I want to create a fantasy world where dragons. Fantasy, for the most part, was children being terrified. Dragons eating them, witches chasing them, all of these Hansel and Gretel, all of these fairy tales are of and then there's goblins and orcs and trolls. And he was like, I just want a fantasy world that's really random. And so he created Wizard of Oz where there's lunch pail trees and weird stuff.
Okay, so before we wrap up, how can the listeners connect with you? Where can they find you?
I'm on TikTok under Dice and Dragons, and that sounds like Dungeons and Dragons. It's just Dice and Dragons. You can go and find our links at diceanddragons.com. Anything that you buy there, dice mugs, other stuff, helps us support the environment here, keep our lights on. And also we are on basically any of our formats like Instagram and other stuff. It's the same thing. And then you can find us on YouTube in that same set too.
Are you on Twitter?
I will be on Twitter. I'm going one application at a time. This week I tackled Discord. So one of these weeks I have a Twitter account, but it's not actively, I haven't run at it just yet. So I haven't announced that one.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for taking this time, because we kept you a little longer than we wanted to, but it was really fun getting inside your mind and everything. So.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to be here.
Thank you for joining us on Creators Anonymous. We are asking for your help. If you know someone that deserves to have their story told, or have any questions about supporting this creator or any others we have interviewed,
let us know on Twitter at CreatorZAnon with a Z, or you can email us at CreatorZAnon@gmail.com. You can chat with me live at the Cast Junkie Discord. And until next time, guys, stay creative.